Good afternoon, everyone. We want to welcome you to take your seats again. We're going to get started in just about a minute. While you're finding your seats, I want to welcome you back, and we want to get right to our next speaker. Rick Robinson is a native Detroiter and fourth-generation musician. For 2 decades, he played double bass in the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, but then decided to embark on a different path. In 2012, he left the DSO and decided to reimagine the way classical music is shared. He's founder of CutTime Productions and CutTime Quartet. He now partners with Classical Revolutions to share classical music in non-traditional spaces. Please join me in welcoming Rick Robinson.
Hi, everyone. So glad to be here. Never underestimate the value of a smile. When my high school asked me to play a solo at the school concert, my mother came to see me play. And she was very proud, but on the way home, she asked me why I didn't smile. I told her I was concentrating. Besides, if I smiled all the time, they'd put me in a straitjacket. Well, that stopped her from bugging me about that for a while, but a decade later, I began to really appreciate her viewpoint and embrace it as one of many metaphors for what troubles the classical industry. Because I didn't seem to be having a good time, even though I was, she wasn't having a good time. Recall I didn't say she came to hear me play, she came to see me play. What she heard was colored by what she saw. After joining the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, I could still imagine her and millions of others like her wondering why we didn't seem to like what we were doing, even though we were often enough in very deep bliss. Playing serious music is, after all, serious business. For a full orchestra to sound like a single player, nailing our parts that are sometimes barely playable demands careful rehearsal, and that we concentrate on several things at once. On reading, on playing, on listening, on watching, all while refreshing the music with new insights we come across. I thought there were few brain cycles left over for smiling, but that's where I turned out to be wrong. In the orchestra, where I could, I began memorizing chunks of music like this to synchronize with the conductor. And by getting my head off of the page, I began to discover the real music. And this is how I learned that the goal of any great music making, rock, jazz, gospel, classical, whatever, is simply to make the music matter, first to each other and then to our audiences. The music is not the end, but rather the medium by which we inspire. We are, after all, in the inspiration business through music. And smiling, moving, talking, and engagement with a broader audience inspires just as much. So when it comes to the challenge of drawing diverse listeners to concerts or truly connecting with the broader community, it's key to realize that while classical music may be formal and serious, it's not as serious as a heart attack. The page may be what the composer originally set, but this is merely a recording technology. The music is more like a pair of shoes, a hat, or an overcoat that we borrow, in which we strut our own stuff. And that music, which has fallen into the public domain after 90 years, if it truly belongs to the whole world, can be recast as a very adaptable and friendly, and I dare say more adaptable and friendly form of inspiration than our high standards in the classical industry will let on. The prevailing high standards of orchestras, for example, let us compete in the Olympics of world-class performance for high marks from important reviewers, affecting everything from tours and tour attendance to recording sales, subscriptions, sponsorships, donations, and grant support. Cash flow has relied on showcasing our world-class credentials, and success depends on being perceived as a leading artistic authority and as an ambassador representing our cities across America, Europe, and Asia. High standards inspire and pay the bills for the most part, but they also come with a social price. Everything has a trade-off because every value has an opposing value. It is the price we pay in the orchestra is that of wider social connection. It's most often called the ivory tower, but it's really more like a worldwide church for reasons that I'm about to make more apparent. What does classical music represent to the average American, especially in a country with much less arts education than in the past, a subculture of rebellion, and now with so much available online? As it has become apparent that times are changing, many orchestras and musicians are interested to draw new listeners, yet without trading some artistic standards, no matter how temporary, it's not effective en masse. I sat in countless orchestra meetings where musicians warned against compromising our standards of presentation. Don't dumb it down. Let the music speak for itself. Always dress better than the audience. The audience should always look up to us. We should never talk down. In fact, it's best not to talk to the audience at all. Well, our response to the need for change was to demand technically perfect players, authoritative conductors, winning soloists, world-class leaders, trending composers, and academic speakers. And we also demanded experienced audiences. Audiences who know how to take in a concert, who have some idea of what they're going to hear, who wear appropriate attire, and who can sit quietly without distracting anyone else. These demands undoubtedly maximize the concert experience for all who are playing and attending. They maximize focus on the dramatic variety of sounds in the spirit of meditation. This traditional, authoritarian, and essentially spiritual practice is pure and sacred, but it is also sanitized and intolerant. I'm convinced that, consciously or unconsciously, we've been filtering out new audiences to maximize our own satisfaction. If fine art music is to continue as an end unto itself, its chief purpose, inspiration, must be apparent without further explanation. And I contend to you that this purpose, this value, is no longer apparent to the vast majority of the American public. While a great performance can speak for itself, songs immediately set their own context, whereas instrumental music is a foreign language that needs some introduction. A picture may be worth 1,000 words, but we use captions nonetheless to set its context. That's why I began to bend the standard. I was not surprised to discover that new listeners and even many veterans really loved it when we musicians would open up and talk to them like families and friends. Artists can be real people, and when I started articulating my opinion of how classical music uniquely works, such as the dramatic principles of tension release that drive this music forward and make it sexy and bold, people listened and watched for these in our CutTime performances. I recognize that there's this burning curiosity about why we chose classical, or this particular piece to play, or what to listen for that makes a performance compelling, or how someone without experience can access the secrets of this music. There's a huge mass of adults who admit to inexperience with classical music, and who are curious to pick up information in a comfortable manner. Is the thought of serious fun with classical music just too sacrilegious to contemplate? Am I a traitor for uttering those words? Well, just call me Dr. Strangelove, because I learned to stop worrying and love the casual new audience. I think of my big sister, Amy. She studied violin through college, but eventually earned a doctorate in psychology. And while she loves classical, she rarely comes to concerts. And when she does, she has to sit in the back, because when she thinks she knows the music, just like at home with a stereo, she wants to sing along and play her air violin. She doesn't like to just sit there and listen to the experts play. She wants to join in, to enjoy what she knows in any way she can. But rather than tell anyone it's impossible to truly appreciate the symphony without trying to play an instrument, clearly it's not, we can begin warming up classical for the masses simply by introducing it with genuine regard, humanity, and engaging activities. It's clear that we artists must innovate, but we need to go ahead and step much further outside the box depending on the listeners. If we have an artistic license to understand and enjoy classical, then we need to share that license, both literally and liberally. We are the missionaries needed to jump off the altar of the concert sanctuary and spread the good news that some of this music is accessible to, let's say, half. And we can demonstrate exactly how with movement and effective analogies. I've been able to describe music as a meal. I love food. And as walking, as breathing, as a sport, as running, as a sailboat. Classical is another alternative to all the other kinds of music that we enjoy. And there's no better time than now to show this to the millennial generation, which doesn't want to miss out on any style of music. Especially in the club scene, recent smoking laws have made it possible to bring classical where people discover other favorite music. That's where we all feel free to sing and dance and yell or drum the table. And that's a place to let Beethoven take us on a brief inward journey, a struggle and redemption, or just for the musical fireworks. I think it's worth doing a Snoopy dance about. How about you? Rather than art-centric, I call this kind of artistry audience-centric. It's another way to serve, or better yet, to liberate fine art, because it wants to touch all of humanity. Putting classical in front of those who avoid concerts is the first step to effectively connecting. How then can we translate the value of classical in non-academic terms? What is in classical for them? And how do we make wild imagination more apparent? How can we get real with classical? How do we reset the context for largely instrumental music? Popular culture and music in America are dominated by words. Song is king, and he's married to rhyme and rhythm. Songs, rap, even poetry and storytelling backed by music have personality at their core. This single form, songs, make strong cultural values within which instrumental classical music struggles to relate. So it's about time we use words and more to add value. Let's guess that if half of all Americans don't seek out instrumental music, just relaxing and exposing them to what is personal and fun will create a certain percentage of new audience. Don't give them long half hours, just demonstrate fun making serious music, sharing real excitement, vulnerability, risky jokes, as well as fascinating information. These are the new benchmarks for growing love and trust with new audiences, both younger and older. This is what I call new classical, and it's less focused on perfect execution in favor of real connection. Because music is essentially a form of love, A bit of anything goes connects new listeners. And the time is now for the raw classical that liberates both artists and fine art music to make an impact and real fans in the casual community. There's more curiosity than ever. Let's facilitate it. Who doesn't deserve meaning, after all? I've got a phrase for you. Creating curiosity is the currency for creating new community. Okay? Repeat after me. Creating curiosity is the currency for creating new community. A certain percentage will upgrade to traditional concerts from introductory shows, especially when we can program a broad historical variety to clue in new adult listeners to the development of Western written music, with attention to its timeless qualities. So I call to artists to consider and find balance with both sides of this coin. Within the opposing viewpoint of our perspective will be the definition of our own special purpose. My call to concert presenters is to embrace your surrounding community and send out enthusiastic, resident fine artists to places where people already gather and allow the cultural bridge to flow sometimes in both directions. And my call to veteran audiences is to engage new listeners at traditional concerts and avoid the specially marked new classical concerts if you can't accept club rules. We need to take the symphony to the people's houses, and we must make new people feel really welcomed in our house. When new, it's easy to feel judged or shushed out, and we will need you and the ushers to dial it back a bit. So, in closing, fearing dumbing down makes perfect sense when we're trying to build and maintain standards which compete on the world stage. But fear of experimenting for people who don't understand fine art makes no sense when trying to build a new community. Yes, classical music is sacred, yet it also makes great entertainment when we let it. And that's worth smiling about. Thank you.
My third night of being in Venezuela, we heard a concert of Gustavo Dudamel conducting the Teresa Carreño Youth Orchestra. I literally have the hair stand up on the back of my neck.
Percussion or the flute. Violin, and I want to play the tuba.
I really like guitar.
I used to be so antisocial. I had next to no friends. No one liked me. I told my mom, I don't want to do this. I want to play guitar. I don't want to play classical music. I don't like it.
Wait, let me see. Where are you? I want to do that. I want to do that so bad.
Do that.
I think it's about engaging. You know, engaging them to realize that they can do much more than they think. See, this is the most difficult part about playing the trumpet, okay? You have to work out these muscles that are here in your face. Believe it or not, they can get stronger. One. It helps if you bend your knees too. You gotta do the whole. I'm kidding.
I need a violin. Can I get a violin?
Her mother passed away in 2001. She was 2. But her mother wanted to play the violin.
My mom, she never got to do it, so that's why I wanted to do it. To make her happy and things. Every time I play music, I feel like safe. Instead of like talking, I can express myself by playing.
reason we do this every day is to give you guys the opportunity to sound as good as possible. And I refuse to put you guys on any stage, anywhere, in front of an audience that would sit there and say, oh, that's so cute. They're little black kids from West Philadelphia playing classical music. I want them to look at you guys and say, wow, these kids can play.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Stanford Thompson.
Wow, it's great to be here. I want to take you back to my last semester at the Curtis Institute of Music. I was really confused. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and there were really two things that scared me. One was just seeing the state of orchestras. This was also a time when the economy tanked back in 2008, and I pretty much lost the majority of my work. Orchestras were having a hard time. No one was hiring in any type of field. And the reality kind of sunk in that I was a trained professional trumpet player. That's what I knew how to do. You put a conductor in front of me, sure, I'll play anything. Then the second thing that I was thinking at that time was this disconnect between the art form and the community. Now, 3 years into Curtis, I had a chance to work with all of the best conductors, Simon Rattle and Muti, and great soloists like Hilary Hahn and Long Long and Yo-Yo Ma, the list goes on and on. Played in the best halls around the world, and always received the very best. We had the best teachers, we had the best clinics and master classes. And I realized that beyond Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia, that these types of opportunities were not available to kids really outside of that little bubble that I lived in. So I go into my 4th year, I'm confused. I question everything. A couple months later, we're in Carnegie Hall with Alan Gilbert playing something I can't remember. See, that's how important that was. I can't remember what we were playing. But at the end of that performance, I remember looking out into the hall. It was maybe 2/3 filled. And sure, they clapped, they were enthusiastic, and then the applause died. And I knew that my colleagues and I making that great music on that stage, that everything we did that night would die at the end of the very, very last note that we played. Nobody beyond those walls were going to hear it and benefit from it, or even have the opportunity to be inspired by what just took place in that room. It was a remarkable concert, the best concert I've ever played in my life, and probably will be the best concert that I yet will play. And to me, something was wrong with that. It's great. 2/3 of the hall was filled. Who cares? We made great music that night. Who cares? Oh, the orchestras are having a tough time. Who cares? What's really happening in New York or Philadelphia or Detroit? What do people care about? In this room, sure, we will sit here and say, oh, it's horrible what's happening in the Twin Cities with these orchestras falling apart, and this is the most compelling thing. We have to fix this. We have to find a way to double our endowment. We have to find a way to make sure we pay musicians more, which they do deserve. But the average person walking down the street in Minneapolis or in Philadelphia or in Detroit or LA or New York, they are not thinking about what tragedy there would be if the Philadelphia Orchestra or the Curtis Symphony or whatever disappeared. And that's what I struggled with. So I was pretty sure by the middle of my last year, I was done. I went out to South Korea. I played with the Seoul Philharmonic for a couple of weeks. I loved the people. I loved the city. But I could not picture myself doing that 40 weeks out of the year. The week I got back, a friend sent me a video of Dr. Jose Abreu, who founded El Sistema, winning the TED Prize. And he had a very, very clear message. The reason that this art form should exist and these musicians is for the benefit of the community, and that the art must be dignified on a much higher level, and that culture for the poor should not be a poor culture.
These were the things that really sunk down deep. So a friend of mine from Ann Arbor was in Philadelphia, and he convinced me to go out to Kenya to start a music program. It's the last thing that I was thinking about doing. My last concert at Curtis, I played Beethoven 3 with Simon Rattle. And I went from that to Twinkle Twinkle in a really small village about 4 hours north of Nairobi. But in that small village, I learned something, a lesson that is incredibly important. And I hope that you all will take this with you when you leave today. In this village, I had 90 woodwind, brass, and percussion instruments. I ran a band program at a high school. I did a general music program at an elementary school. And to kind of set the context for this town, unemployment was a little bit over 70%. And kids in this town, if you just get a B or higher on their national exams, you can go to high school for free, you can go to college for free. But why do that when there's no jobs for you to have? So because of all of this that was going on, we worked really hard. I had 2 other Kenyans that were music teachers. I found out the day I got there, they knew about 4 chords on the guitar. And we sat down every morning for an hour and a half, and we stayed a couple of lessons ahead of the kids. We would go over the fingerings for the French horn or the clarinet, the flute, which I still can't make a sound on, but they could. That was a good thing. And we made sure that within that class, we could tell them, no, your finger should be here or there. I would take pictures of the kids that were having the most difficulty, and I would send it to my parents, who are both retired music educators. And they would say, yeah, that kid needs to drop his chin a little bit, or he's a little bit too tight, and I would go in, and just about every time it worked. They thought I was a genius. And after about 3.5 weeks of doing this work, I mean, this was all day, from the morning to literally about 7 o'clock when the last kid would leave. We taught general music for 2 hours at the elementary school. We did choir and some other activities. Then we had a very short lunch break, and then we went over to the high school to make sure that every student in the school, there's probably about 300 students, received some type of music education, but for usually half an hour a day. And then we would stay after school for about 4 hours, and the kids would patiently wait, and we would teach them all. So after about 3.5 weeks of this, I'm tired, I'm exhausted. So I get there, the kids are coming after school, and I sit outside the like chemistry lab. Well, not really chemistry lab. It was just a building that had 4 walls and half a ceiling. And so I sat outside the building, and I told the kids, look, we're not going to have class today. You can ask me questions about my personal life or about America or whatever, but we're just not going to have class. So sure enough, one of the trumpet players raises his hand and tells all the rest of the guys, hey, we're going to have band anyway. So if you want to have band, come with me. We're going to go in and do this. So of course I get upset because they're doing all the stuff I've been trying to tell them not to do. So I run into the class and I say, okay, we'll have class. At the end of class, one of the trumpet players came up to me, young woman. Her name's Nancy. She was 16 at the time, but she told me the story about when she was 14. Her mother passed away from malaria. About a week later, her father raped her, and then he killed himself within a couple of days. She had to then go live with her aunt, who even to this day believes that she still killed both of her parents for some crazy reason because she's possessed. And the problem that she has is that every month when she cycles, she bleeds too much. The pain is too much. What should take a couple of days takes her literally the large majority of the month. So there's really only a couple of days where she doesn't have this type of pain. The doctors in Kenya are not good enough to do the procedure that could help her relieve that pain for the rest of her life. And she has a really high chance of not surviving the surgery. And all of this stress that she lived with, she told me at the end of that class, Mr. Stan, that's what the kids would call me, Mr. Stan, thanks so much for having this class. This is what I deal with on a day-to-day basis, and this is the only time that I'm not thinking about that stress. And at the end of that, I was just like, okay, we need to have class every single day. This is at least keeping this one girl's life together, her body and soul together. So I was there for about another 2.5 months before I came back to Boston to start the Abreu Fellowship Program at the New England Conservatory, which was a result of Dr. Abreu's TED Prize wish. And by the time I left Kenya, I realized that the thing that is most dangerous about poverty is not necessarily these kids not having a proper house or food or medicine, but it's this idea of these kids feeling like they have nothing to offer the world and that the world has absolutely nothing to offer them. It's destructive. These kids completely turn off, and the stress that they live with every single day bogs them down. Now, I knew if I drove down Market Street in Philadelphia long enough, west, I would see the same type of poverty that I experienced in Kenya. Sure, some things on a material level, yes, look different. But the idea that these kids live with the type of stress that bogs them down day after day stops them from being more productive in the classroom and really in life. So let me put it into perspective. Let's say that you're in the forest, okay, and a bear comes at you. Now, when this bear comes at you, you're a little bit freaked out. Two things can happen, okay, this whole fight or flight type thing. Your body releases this short-term hormone called adrenaline that helps take blood from places you really don't need it in your body and puts it in places where you do need it, like your legs, for example. This is why your eyes dilate and your hands get all cold. So sure enough, you run away from this thing. Hopefully you get away from this bear. Or another thing, if you decide you're going to actually fight this bear, okay, which is probably the stupidest thing that you can do, but if you're going to fight this bear, a different thing happens. A long-term stress hormone is released called cortisol. And cortisol turns off the executive functioning part of your brain that pretty much would tell you you're an idiot to sit here and try to fight this bear. So if you can turn that part off in your brain, then yes, you can try to fight this bear. Good luck. Now, what happens when that bear comes home every single day from the bar and beats mom? What if dad's not there and mom is working 2 or 3 different jobs? So what ends up happening is that these kids come to school from the very first day with so much stress already built in. They're not going to sit there and learn how to read or some math problem or anything like that. It's absolutely crazy. So what happens over time is that these kids not only are hitting kindergarten already left behind, but by the time they're teenagers, they're literally, their executive function, their prefrontal cortex has turned off completely. So sure, let's join a gang. I don't really care about if I'm going to live or not. Wait, my body is telling me I want to do something, so it's fine. Let me go hook up with this guy and maybe end up pregnant or spread a disease. You know, this is exactly what happened. So, of course, you know, we started thinking about, with trying to develop a program in Philadelphia, how can we solve some of the most compelling problems in Philadelphia, which are really these 3 most compelling problems. Pretty much youth violence, the achievement gap, and high school dropout. That's what people in Philadelphia really care about. Unfortunately, the Philly Orchestra didn't even make the list at all with anybody that I talked to. Sorry. So we knew that we would have to fight these issues within these children as vigorously as it happens to them. So the kids come to play on Philly for 3 hours a day, Monday through Friday for the entire school year, and then they come 6.5 hours during the month of July. They pick a standard orchestral instrument, whatever they want to play. It could be harp, it could be bassoon, violin, viola, and there are about 240 of these kids that are doing this in Philadelphia now. And as a result of this, they are receiving a group lesson every single day for an hour, a theory class every day for an hour, and an ensemble rehearsal. They perform about every 2 weeks all over the city. And we also do a lot of research in terms of executive functioning. And executive functions, those are the things that really help them to improve really their goal-directed behavior, helps improve their memory, their attention, also helps their inhibitions. When you teach a kid, don't play in that rest, don't do it, or the pattern changes, it's the same part of their brain that is activated when someone makes them upset, and do they punch them in the face or not? So we connect all of these different activities with the curriculum, with all of the executive functions, and the outcomes. Because the truth is, music does not make a child smarter or happier. Ask any of the musicians in this room, all right? But what it can do is teach a very specific skill set. And then that skill set can then transfer into the types of academic outcomes. So how I see classical music being very effective is that it's not about, did we play all of the right notes? I mean, the kids don't care. When Simon Rattle has come twice to work with them, or Bobby McFerrin or Wynton Marsalis, I mean, Simon Rattle is just the white dude with really crazy hair. It's not, when the audiences hear them, it's not, oh, these kids play so perfectly in tune. But what's really happening is that these kids are getting an opportunity, and it's the art form of classical music that is helping them to overcome some of these obstacles in their lives, and at the same time, solve some of the most compelling problems. I like to think that the time is now. I know that we talk about diversity in the arts and all of these things. Sure, this is wonderful, it's great. But these issues these kids face, it doesn't see a white or black or rich or poor. Every single child needs this. And as a result of this work, of going into the community and bringing Brahms and Beethoven in, these kids love it because they're curious. And then these parents and community, they're inspired because of what these kids are doing. And I always like to think that there's no greater time than now, as these communities are falling apart, for us as artists to put our art form on a much higher level and bring it to people in innovative ways that really make a compelling difference. I want to thank you all for listening to me, and I want to encourage all of us to think about ways that we can influence the community. Thanks so much.
Stanford, don't get away quite yet. Stanford? Stanford, can I get you back out here for 1 second? Oh, he made a face. He gave me the side eye. I know, the follow-up question.
Uh-oh.
I know. It's not a hard one, I don't think. As you were describing your work in Kenya,
Sure.
and also when you were developing this program, did you have to convince the community that this was worthwhile? Or was it accepted right from the beginning that, oh no, this is going to benefit the kids? Because as you describe some of the issues these kids are facing, it seems like it could be difficult to convince people that this could be a solution.
Sure. Well, I mean, there was two conversations. I mean, the arts community, especially even the funders and everybody involved with it, they were all telling me, this is too hard, it's too expensive, the kids won't like classical music, all of this stuff, blah, blah, blah. The community was saying, actually, we want this. We want our kids to have these types of opportunities. They signed up for the program. I think there were over 500 that signed up for 80 spots. The amount of schools that wanted the program and parents and the support, we didn't lose a single kid in the first year. It's a big commitment for these kids. And they learn after about 2 weeks, it's not easy to do this when you're trying to always correct that bow hold. So it was just kind of bridging the gap between, of course, I need the resources from over here, and there's a community here that's ready to receive it. And I always felt that for some reason we can spend $15 million a year at Curtis to educate 160 students, and that makes sense. But if we want to spend $5,000 per child in West Philadelphia so they have the same experience, for some reason that can't happen. And perhaps maybe no one told me before I started that's impossible. But now that it's happening, we find a lot of support to make it work.
So how did you bridge that gap with funders when you were first beginning? Because as anyone who's had to report on a grant knows, you have to be able to show measurable benefits from your program, but you didn't have that starting off, did you?
Right, correct. Starting off, I mean, everybody knows that music's good for kids. It will help them. We want to do it in a very unique way. So I found a funder in Philadelphia who would help me out that first year to say, look, I just want to put together this experiment. Let's just see if it works. And sure enough, it worked to the point where then we replicated pretty quickly. And we can't keep up with the amount that's there. So it's a lot of convincing and showing. You watch the kids on a musical level. We finally have the data that supports their grades going up, and they're coming to school 30% more. They're a letter grade and a half above all of the other kids, even the kids that do academic tutoring for 2 hours a day, 4 days a week. They're still a letter grade and a half above. So it's just, when you rewire the brain, it's so much more effective than sitting down with the kid and saying, okay, I'm going to teach you how to read for 2 hours a day. So that's what we see, and there's more work to be done.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stanford Thompson.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is the executive director of the award-winning Boston Children's Chorus, an organization that brings youth from the ages of 7 to 18 from the greater Boston area to create harmony, both musically and socially, through a shared love of music. One of the founding staff members of the organization, the Boston Children's Chorus has grown from a pilot program of just 30 children to 500 singers. He says diversity is necessary, but it is not enough. Please welcome David C. Howse and guest Ben Hires.
I walk into the hall, the concert hall, the opera, the ballet. I quickly pick up my tickets, look around, and I very quickly notice that I may be the only one. There are very few people, if any, who look like me, and immediately my internal signals start to go off, and I say to myself, Boston, we have a problem.
With the major changes in our demographics of our country, our cities, and our communities, issues of diversity are ever important. We know this. And talking about diversity is nothing new to us in the arts and culture field. Nevertheless, the fruits of our diversity work have not been fully realized.
As a field, we have been rightfully eager to diversify our organizations, our boards, our creative and administrative teams, our participants, as well as our audiences. But we, at the Children's Chorus, have worked really, really hard in our efforts to make sure that we're reflecting the diverse and amazing diversity of our communities and our organization. But as an organization, we had not stopped to think about, to appreciate, to understand, and to address the complications of diversity. It's as if we wanted to prize the beauty of the pearl without actually diving for the oyster. Diversity, as we've acknowledged, is really tough work. And we as an organization had not even thought about what it requires of us. We've had some success in diversity at the Boston Children's Chorus, but we hadn't stopped to think about how to create a safe space for individuals in this now diverse environment.
David and I and the rest of the chorus staff have been trying to figure out what that process looks like for us. And we've also been trying to figure out what the obstacles are to dealing with our differences respectfully. Now, in 2003, our organization was founded by a social worker with the express intent of bringing diverse singers and audiences together to deal with the issues that have kept us apart. So we began to assemble a diverse board of directors, hire diverse staff, recruit diverse singers, sing music from many different cultures all across Boston. We sang in Baptist churches, synagogues, homeless shelters. We sang in the State House for the governor. We sang at galas for community leaders. We sang in Symphony Hall. And diversity was and is still a business imperative for the organization. And we know that the work of diversity is tough, but we're proud of what we've accomplished in Boston. But we assumed that by bringing all these diverse groups together, there would be authentic social bridging and empathy, and it would all happen organically.
Perhaps we were naive or simply hopeful. But in our 11 short years, we've come to realize that true social bridging and breaking down of the barriers like race and religion and geography and socioeconomic status, in order to break down those barriers, we had to be much more intentional in our work. So we began to challenge some of the assumptions around our model. And believe me, there are a number of assumptions around the model. But we'd like to spend our time this evening thinking about one of those assumptions, the assumption that diversity in and of itself is an effective tool for social bridging. We've come to realize that diversity is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So in our time, we'd like to explore the idea of moving beyond diversity to a much deeper level of understanding of ourselves and of others.
We, like most, if not all of you here, believe in the power of the arts to inspire, to encourage, and bring us closer together as a community. At the chorus, we believe that the art of singing together, along with anti-bias training, can have amazing outcomes. We can not only train fine musicians, but equally as important, we can train more empathetic, more compassionate, young singing citizens of the world. To that end, we have begun to re-envision our work to be a fusion of our robust music education program and anti-bias program. We believe that empathy and compassion can be taught through taking the perspective of others through music. Simply put, we teach, we discuss, and we sing music that allow our singers to see the perspective of others. Before we give you a few examples, we're first going to talk about the self.
In understanding self, it's important to acknowledge and to accept without shame or blame the fact that we all have biases. These biases, both conscious but mostly unconscious, influence the way that we interact and perceive other people, sometimes creating realized and unrealized tensions between those who are different from us. On occasion, our unconscious bias is in direct conflict with our strongly held conscious values and beliefs. Nothing reflects this more than the famous quote by the civil rights leader Jesse Jackson when he said, and I quote, "There's nothing more painful for me at this stage in my life than to walk down a street and hear footsteps and think of robbery and then turn around and see somebody white and feel relieved." This honest statement by this man who led national campaigns against discrimination is shocking, but perhaps you've had a similar experience. Our unconscious bias, deeply bedded within the recesses of our mind, can get the best of us, and we want to bring them to the surface, unearth them, if you will, so that we can begin to address them.
At the chorus, we are learning that the best way to address bias is through self-awareness. And self-awareness can be developed through the self-study of our strengths and weaknesses, our values and our beliefs, our attitudes and our own biases. And if not addressed, these biases can lead to uncomfortable situations, dangerous environments, and unexpected outcomes that are less than ideal for creating mutual respect with each other. And this happens all the time when we're out in the world. And the New York Times columnist, op-ed columnist Charles Blow got it right when he said, quote, "We do not have to operate with malicious spirit to do harm. Insensitivity and ignorance are sufficient. In fact, intolerance that is disarming is the most dangerous kind. It can masquerade as morality," end quote. We need to remember that our biases and our stereotypes affect how we treat others and how we think of others.
So what does all this have to do with children singing? We hope to use our music to bring those biases to the surface and address them through a process called perspective taking. Now, of all the issues that seem to divide us in society, we at the Boston Children's Chorus have chosen to take a closer look at race. Now, perhaps you will agree that unlike older generation, race is not the only lens through which our young singers view the world, but we think it's a good, though uncomfortable, place to start. We believe that a culture of empathy can be fostered in the rehearsal setting.
Take, for example, one of our choirs, our Young Men's Ensemble. It's filled with teenagers, young men, black, white, Asian, Latino. Some are tall, some are lanky. Some are more well-off, some are less so. Some live in Boston, some in the suburbs. But they represent the rich diversity of our community, and they all love to sing. And imagine our conductor coming in and preparing for our MLK Jr. concert, and he tells the guys, "We're going to learn a song called The Death of Emmett Till." Now, many of you know the story of Emmett Till. He was a 14-year-old African-American in 1955 visiting his family in Mississippi when his life was tragically cut short when he was brutally murdered for allegedly flirting with a white woman in a corner store. Let's hear our young men sing part of that song.
Folks, listen to this story. It's one the world should know. About a Negro boy of 14 named Emmett Till. From Chicago to Mississippi to see his Uncle Mose. But we won't see little Emmett anymore. Emmett Till, Emmett Till. His name will be a legend we all know. Tallahatchie, Mississippi, to see his Uncle Mose, but we won't see little Emmett anymore.
Now, as many of you can imagine, many of our young men didn't know who Emmett Till was. And in our rehearsals, we create a safe space for them to talk about things. And as they began to explore the lyrics in the story, they realized the 60-year-old story was relevant to their lives. As they began to talk about the story with our conductor, Trayvon Martin came up. The movie Fruitville Station came up. Many of our young men began to share stories about their own experience growing up in today's society. And they began to ask questions, and they asked, what if Emmett Till or Trayvon Martin or Oscar Grant had not been black? Would their experiences been any different? These were their questions, not mine.
This intimate and honest dialogue made it possible for our white young singers to have just a glimpse into the perspective of their fellow musicians of color. Empathy and compassion can be learned through self-awareness and perspective-taking, which is made possible through the music that we sing. Now, not everyone agrees with our approach to this work, and many will argue that we're just drudging up emotional baggage. Well, I think that the great Southern writer, William Faulkner, said it best when he said, "The past is not dead, it's not even past." Our inability to discuss these difficult issues only prevents us from moving forward. Our inability to talk about these difficult issues only prevents us from understanding the complications of diversity.
We don't think we can get rid of our singers' biases, but we hope that through our music and through age-appropriate discussions, our singers can begin to reflect and analyze and interrogate their own biases. Self-reflection and self-awareness can help with bias.
Stanford researchers posit that social connections actually engage and can make people feel more closely connected to each other. And engaging in behaviors related to that culture actually reduce implicit bias. This is not new news, and we, like many of you, probably witness moments of extraordinary transformation. We certainly do in our rehearsals, in our performances across the country and across the world. Take Nomi's story. In 2008, we met the king. King Abdullah of Jordan had traveled to Boston for an event, and we had been invited to sing. Well, that evening sparked a remarkable relationship between the king and the chorus, and a little over a year later, we found ourselves, all 60 of us, traveling to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan on a cultural diplomacy tour as guests of the king. Now, I don't know who was more excited, the kids and the staff or our host in Jordan, but on we went. On that tour was Nomi, 16, curious, and incredibly proud of her Jewish heritage. Going to Jordan and dwelling in a place that was a safe haven for Palestinian refugees created internal conflict for not only Nomi but her family. You see, all her life she had been taught to dislike Palestinians. But in a very tender moment of public self-reflection, this young lady was transformed. Let's listen to Nomi in her own words.
I'm Jewish and I'm from Israel, and I don't think normally I would be coming to Jordan since it's a place where a lot of Palestinian people are refugees. My whole life people have been like, oh my gosh, I hate Palestinians, they hurt our people, and I've never even met one, and I had such a bad opinion of them. And now I've met one, and it's just like, wow, how could I be thinking things like that?
So as you can see from this video, Nomi went to a very uncomfortable place. She realized that she had never met a Palestinian before until she went on this tour and began to sing with them. And she began to realize that despite her cultural and her religious differences, they had so much in common just as being teenagers. Nomi will never look at another Palestinian again in the same way.
Like Nomi, we as individuals, we as organizations have to learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. As we said, this is hard work. Understanding the issues that prevent us from building, sustaining, and maintaining diverse organizations is complicated and it's uncomfortable, but it's so necessary.
We realize that tackling this as a children's chorus is a challenge and ambitious, to say the least. We realize that as an organization, we must reflect the diversity that we want to see in our audiences, and we must be prepared to model the empathy that we want to see our singers learn. And we must be prepared to create a safe space for those young singers to learn about themselves and others through music. Therefore, we are not only teaching music skills, we want to teach empathy, compassion, and self-awareness. These are the qualities of a well-developed mind. These are the qualities that are sometimes hard to see and sometimes hard to measure, but they have a profound impact on not only the individual and the society, but on the singer and on the chorus and on oneself and on others.
In a 2009 Chorus America survey, we learned that choral singing is the most popular form of participation in the performing arts, with over 42 million Americans, adults and children, singing in choruses.
Can you imagine the movement that we can create if we use the art of brute singing to not only create beautiful music, but as a tool to voice our own values and perspectives and to understand the values and perspectives of others that are different than us?
This is the idea that inspires us. We believe that a more peaceful, empathetic, compassionate world can emerge if we only choose to get to know ourselves and to get to know others. Perhaps then our arts organizations will really be truly reflections of our richly diverse communities. And perhaps singing is not the only solution to the problem, but we think it's a great place to start. So let us all sing together. Thank you.
Can you play the song?
What?